Hey, Professor Jackson. This is my tree of Western civilization. I'm going to explain all the important roots of what I think made Western civilization. First, I wanted to hit what you talked about in class, the three pillars of Western civilization. You said Greek and Roman legacy, Christianity, and custom of Germanic barbarians. And so I'm going to kind of hit on those and put that onto perspective of my presentation. First, I wanted to start with where it all began, before 5000 BCE. There, you just have small groups of people, not even civilization, just small groups. I don't want to say tribes because they didn't even unify as such. They were just groups of people, probably shared common interest. But at that time, they actually did start to migrate together. They stopped becoming scavengers and switched actually to agriculture. Now that's a huge root for Western civilization, because at that time, when agriculture and domestication of animals became a thing, was practiced, that's when the people at that time set their roots wherever they were planted and began the civilization that we come to know as cities or as tribes. And so as these cities or tribes grow, and what makes the cities or civilization grow is surplus. So with that surplus of agriculture and domestication of animals, you get cities. So from 5000 to 2000 BCE, we see the emergence of cities. We see the emergence of cities in Western civilization in Mesopotamia. Tons of cities are coming out because of all this surplus. And one really important root for Western civilization would be the cuneiform, or cuneiform. This is where cities begin to write, begin to make records, and that we're able to study. We don't fully know the meaning of everything, but we do know some of the things. And so this was the time that they began to record things, so we knew their lives. Not only that we knew their lives, but they kept track of their trade. They kept track of astrology. They kept track of everything that historians do. They just write everything down. But it's because of the cuneiform and because of the cities provided that ability for people to not have to go and find their own food. There was a surplus of food from the agriculture and domestication of animals for people to have time to be able to invent cuneiform. Armies was another root that I found very important. This particular time period, 5000 to 2000 BCE, armies weren't the armies that we think of today, or even in that time period. At that time, it was mostly just people of that surrounding area. There was no training, there was no armor or anything like that. There was just weapons, whatever they had that could beat someone on the head. So during that time period was really the growth of civilization, cities mostly, cuneiform, really important for trade, because that then made other cities grow, and armies, because then that's how they set their territories. And I'll explain that a little bit further. Next, we have 2000 to 1 CE. 2000 BCE to 1 CE. So here I'm going to switch from Mesopotamia to Macedonia, where we have the Greek states. They were identified as polises. Similar to cities, difference mainly is that they identified themselves as being a unique group together, like Spartans or Greeks or Athenians, something like that. With the polis, they then invented the polyculture. And in class, we talked about it as being growing multiple crops. So olives, corn, wheat, not corn, corn is in North America, olives, all of the agriculture of that area, but they would grow multiple farms of that, multiple crops, whereas before it was just one thing. Here in the polyculture, they're going a surplus of multiple crops. Also at this time, the polis, with the armies, because every city needed an army to protect itself from other armies or other cities invading, but now we have a professional army. One thing that the polis did was they invented the armor and the shield and more of a professional army training. They really made sure that their soldiers weren't just the farmer. 1 minute someone invades a soldier. They had a standby professional army ready to attack whenever someone came by and invaded them. So that was really important. So the switch from an army just made up of its civilians to a professional army made up of people who were trained. Also at this time, we have Hammurabi law code. So this is when he actually, with that time he has, because he's not going and growing food and the rank he held being top of the city he was in, he invented a law code. And so what that shows us as historians is that, one, these people had a set of morals. They had guidelines, rules to live by. It wasn't just chaos. They had set in place guidelines, rules to live by. And that's really important because that shows us that they believed in something higher, that they believed in a higher power. Because why else would anybody do anything any good if it didn't benefit you? And so that's why they have this law code. And so that brings me to religion, a huge root for Western civilization, for any civilization. But at this time, they were polytheistic. They believed in multiple gods. They believed that doing good brought them favors. And they had certain gods that did that for them. And so we'll talk about religion because that plays a major part in Western civilization. But for right now, religion did play a part in this time period, but it wasn't so set in stone like it was further up the tree. So from 1 to 300 BCE, this is where we have groups taking over, and most importantly, empires. So empires are large cities with a vast land that they own. And they own it because of their professional armies creating borders for them. And we don't have maps that specifically show where they were at, but we have their boundaries, their borders, because of professional armies and their outposts that they have. So it's because of empires that we see Rome. And so this starts one of the pillars of Western civilization that we talked about in class for the Roman legacy. Rome was the powerhouse empire at the time from 1 to 300 BCE. Lots of things that Rome did was, one, they have a professional army. They perfected the professional army. But most importantly, what we now have in our culture is law. Rome Rome created a law system, not like the law code, but an actual law system so that people can be tried, so that people can have guilty or innocence put upon them. And it's because of Rome that we have our laws today, basically. It started from Rome. Rome also, an important thing that they did for Western civilization was that with their vast land that they owned, they also needed transportation, things like that to get around. Rome perfected the infrastructure of their empire. And by that, they did roads, aqueducts, but most importantly, they perfected the agriculture or the engineering with cement or concrete. It's because of that that they built large stadiums, theaters, roads, and really built the foundation for empires, but also massive cities and labor. Major thing was slavery. Rome loved their slaves. A third of their population was slaves, and they did that mostly from their professional armies taking over their enemies, but they used their slaves for building all these structures and things like that. So 1 to 300 CE was an important time, not just in that part of Western civilization, but also the Celts. They didn't have the massive empire that Rome had. What they had was smaller, but unique to them. They had what was known as villages. Villages, this is above the Rhine, things like that, where the Celts really were at. They were controlling all of the borderlands, I guess you could say, of Rome, where Rome wouldn't progress in their expansion. One thing, and then going back to the other customs of Germanic barbarians, one thing that the Celts left for us during this time period were the chieftains. Instead of having an emperor like Rome did, they have chieftains. And the Celts, people of that Celt tribe or civilization, were loyal to their chieftain. And I'll kind of explain a little bit more as we go up in time the importance of that. So now from 300 to 600 CE, we see the fall of Rome, Western Rome. Eastern Rome stayed put for longer than our class period takes place, but Western Rome, Italy, things like that, that falls due to the Germanic tribes, the Celts, Germanic invasions. That was a major key to this time period. 1, collapsed Rome. 2, set the boundaries for, where all these other Germanic tribes would end up. 1 would be the Anglo-Saxons and going into Britain, invading Britain multiple times until they eventually kicked the Britons out to Ireland. And it's because of these Germanic invasions, we have all these civilizations pushed to where they basically planted their roots, and then as time progressed, became their own civilizations. Germanic invasions were key for that to happen. It wouldn't have happened any other way. Rome was basically at a standstill at this time. It wasn't progressing anymore. It stopped expanding. It was just a poor body at the time, because Eastern Rome had all the wealth. So Germanic invasions. But here's something that's really important with the Germanic invasions, pushing everyone around, and with the Roman law, but the Germanic tribe laws. This was important because the Germanic tribe laws were that they were loyal to their chieftains, but now they're loyal to their kings. So because of the Celts, what they brought was loyalty to the chieftain, but since with the Germanic invasions, they increased their land, and so now they increase the wealth of that chieftain, and that's the start of kings being loyal to the king, the queen, and it's because of the Germanic invasions, the Celts, and their tribe laws that we see that. But something really important in the religion aspect of this time period was Rome being very polytheistic, then changed its focus to more of a singular God. monotheistic Christianity. Christianity being a pillar in itself, or a major role for the Western civilization. And it's Rome that really started that pillar. Christianity started more in the East, but Rome adopted it as their chief religion, thanks to Constantine. And because of that one God Christian belief, they try to spread that out to all the other tribes, the other civilizations. They really wanted to spread. I mean, that's the idea of Christianity, to spread this knowledge of the God, a single God. And so that was super important at this time. Like I said, Western Rome fell. Most of it fell because of all these Germanic tribes and inside of Rome and all of that Western Europe. But another role, or another route, I would say, for the Western civilization would be the plague of Justinian. Not the Black Plague that we know of, but before the Black Plague, just as deadly, and crippled the civilization, the population of Rome. Really killed a lot of people. And that was important because at the time there was a ton of people, everybody was poor, they were just trying to get by, live, because there wasn't a good quality of life. And this really just put the nail right on the head of everyone needing that civilization, needing that empire, or someone to help control them or have power over them. So now we're in 600 to 800 CE. Something important here that I wanted to point out that I thought was really important was Charlemagne. Charlemagne did tons of good for Europe now. He's crowned the king of Rome, and so what he is then known for is not just the king of Rome, but he's the father of Europe. And he does this through his fierce leadership, but two, because he institutes the people. He teaches these people living in that area of Rome, or of Europe, Western civilization, how to read, how to write. He does this with the church, Christian church, and he teaches everyone pretty much intelligence. They're not just bodies who can plow, but they can now understand and think for themselves. So with that, he's then sending, not Charlemagne personally, but at the time the Christians are sending missionaries all over the place. They're sending Christians throughout all of Europe, trying to teach everyone about the Christian God, converting people, hopefully turning them to the side of this Christian rulership. But on the eastern side of Europe, Islam, that branches, that starts. Founded more so in the eastern part of the world. What's really important for Islam is that they're, one, very powerful. Lots of people at this time are following this religion. I put the Umayyad up here on the board because I felt like this ruling class really shaped Europe. They were not the first ones to spread Islam into Europe, but they held a strong hold for the Islam throughout the cities in Europe, the countries in Europe, and it's because of them that it's spread from Spain all the way northern Africa, all over of Europe. It never really reached higher than Italy, but it definitely did get Spain and all of northern Africa. I put the Battle of Tours up here because I felt like this was important because this was the key battle that the French won, which kicked out the Islamic religion, the Muslims, out of Spain, and that's how Spain then got its power to become more of a Christian state. Okay, so 800 to 1000 CE, I have Alfred the Great. What Alfred the Great was really well known for was uniting Britain. Because of the Viking invasions, the Vikings have been around since 600, 800, but they really played a key role, I believe, in the Middle East too, around 700 CE, because they're invading Britain, they're invading Eastern Europe, they're invading all over. Basically, one, they're great fighters, they're great shipbuilders, and so they're able to travel and just do lightning quick attacks. It's Alfred the Great who is the one to stop the Viking invasions in in Britain, and to really make Britain become one, a single body. I put up here the Treaty of Verdun. This treaty is important because it's what pretty much is the beginning of France. It's this treaty that splits the Franks into 3 separate bodies, and like I said, that's the root for France as we know it today. Now, Eastern Europe, there's a ton of history that's going on right now in Eastern Europe, mostly because of the Vikings. I just picked Eastern Europe up here because it plays such a key role, and I think it's forgotten a lot in history. We just focus on Rome, Britain, France, but we forget about the powerhouse that this Eastern Europe was. The Czechs, we have the Bulgarians, Russia, and it's all during this time, because of the Vikings, that Eastern Europe plants its stake in history and becomes this body, these separate countries, and sees themselves as one. Something really interesting is the story of Santa Claus comes from Eastern Europe. And then lastly, for the last part of our class, we talked about 1000 to 1300 CE. And what I really got from the class was church basically was the dominant party, the dominant key player in Western civilization. It's the church that rules in Rome. It's the church that has the missionary sent all over the place. It's the church that is, because of God's will, that they are destined for this. It's because of the church. The church also is the largest landowner in Europe. I'm sure it still is today. It's the church that has all of this power because they use religion, they use fear of God to manipulate and control people, their thoughts, into getting what they want and what they need. I put nobles up here. This is kind of the last thing we've talked about was the nobles, because at this time there's lots of poor people, there's peasants, there's armies and things like that. There's so many people. And it's the nobles, the higher class of people, who the kings at the time rely on mostly. The nobles own land, they have few